Welcome to Inside the Middle East Q&A series at the Middle East Initiative. I'm Jennifer Rowland. I'm a first-year MPP student at the Harvard Kennedy School and an editor for the Journal of Middle East Politics and Policy. Today I'm joined by Maria Fantappie, an analyst on Iraq at the International Crisis Group. She was previously a visiting scholar at the Carnegie Middle East Center in Beirut, specializing in state building in the Middle East. Maria, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So we're going to start with the current situation in Iraq, since that's your specialty. Iraq is currently experiencing some of the worst violence it's seen since the height of the recent U.S. war there. Can you talk a little bit about what's driving this deterioration in the security situation right now?
Well, of course, the deterioration of violence in Iraq has two main reasons, I will say. One is regional and one is strictly related to the developments within Iraq domestic politics. First, if we look at the regional situation, we can see that Iraq has a long border with Syria, a country which is witnessing conflict since more than 2 years. And of course, part of the violence that is happening today in Iraq is linked to the spillover of the Syrian conflict inside Iraq borders. And more specifically on the issue of the proliferation of Al-Qaeda groups which were already present in Iraq and which proliferate across Iraq and Syrian border in a situation where states both in Syria and Iraq are fragmenting to some extent. Of course, transnational armed groups such as Al-Qaeda finds between the border in the two states safe havens to proliferate. So this is one of the reasons of the ongoing violence. And then there is a more specific reason, which is related to domestic politics, Iraqi domestic politics, which is the way that the Iraqi government led by Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has been dealing with the Sunni population who are actually populating those areas which are neighboring Syria, which are in the portion of Iraqi territory neighboring Syria. Over the past year, the Sunni population have been mobilizing in demonstration, asking for better representation in Iraqi state institution, and the government on the other side didn't really had any appetite for negotiation, but rather undertook a crackdown on the demonstration, and this of course led the Sunnis in these areas to a feeling of disenfranchisement, which in a way also opened door for Al-Qaeda to proliferate in these areas.
Thanks. So how likely are the predictions? Some people have been predicting that this is going to lead to a more full-scale sectarian war in Iraq, which seems like a very scary proposition. Do you see Iraq sliding towards that? Does the government seem to be increasing the likelihood that you could see a bigger sectarian war?
Well, it's a great question to the extent that I think that at some point as the US were leaving the country, we were in a situation where we had hope and Iraq having a bright future and Iraq reestablishing as a state, and also a process of national reconciliation between Sunni and Shia to take place after that the two communities have been fighting each other during 2006 and 7 and 8. Unfortunately, the current situation, it's exactly as you mentioned. We are facing a great risk of polarization of the Iraqi society again between the Sunni and the Shia community. I will say that this is led by, again, a regional factor, which is the overall regional climate of polarization between the political players who are using Shiism as on one hand, and on the other side, the other political players in the region who are strengthening and the Sunni identities. Right. And but also, if we look at the Iraqi case, the likelihood of a conflict between the two communities, I think, we are not still at the point where we can predict a civil war to happen. The communities, both Shia and Sunni, they are more suspicious of each other's, Of course they mistrust each other. There is not mobility between, for instance, citizens who live in Shia areas of the capital and citizens who live in Sunni areas of the capital. But I think that the greatest risk is not of a civil war taking place between armed Shia and armed Sunni, but rather a scenario where the Iraqi government itself will strengthen more and more its Shia identity.
Okay.
And use the state institution against Sunni population. This will lead to a kind of civil war scenario where actually one part will be the government representing the Shia and its state institution, but mostly Shia-dominated state institution. On the other hand, the Sunni population. It's a different scenario than what we saw in 2006, but still, it's not a very happy scenario.
Yeah. So the U.S. has been aiding the Iraqi government with weapons and with funding. Is the U.S. government attaching any strings or making sure in any way that the Iraqi government is not continuing to disenfranchise Sunni civilians? Or is this sort of just, here are the weapons for you to fight Al-Qaeda?
Well, from the U.S. perspective, there has been attempts to negotiate a solution where, the U.S. government will provide weapons, but at the same time there will be some condition on these weapons, and the condition would have be for the Iraqi government to have to negotiate with with at least some representative of the Sunni community. I think that the U.S. government, though, did not succeed really to in a way, to check that this will happen. I mean, even this weapon will be delivered, and at the end of the day, there is not much of a possibility to check how they will be used. And in this, first of all. And second, I would say that indeed the Iraqi government is in the process of negotiating with some of the Sunni tribal leaders and some of the Sunni representatives, for instance, Osama al-Nujayfi, which is the main Sunni political leader. But I mean, there is a question which needs to be asked, which is, are these Sunni representatives really, these Sunni leaders really representative of the Sunni population, which is actually in Anbar today? I think that at this moment we can see that there is, the answer to this question is basically, unfortunately, mostly no. That these Sunni leaders with whom the government is negotiating are rather people who are, who are picked also and co-opted by the government somehow. So I don't think that negotiating with them will necessarily entail the solution for the Sunni issue. It will probably rather marginalize more and more Sunnis to some extent. So
during the U.S. war in Iraq, the recent one, what happened in 2007 is what's known as the Anbar awakening, right? So you had the U.S. troops come into Anbar, where Al-Qaeda was based, and sort of help the Sunni civilians rise up against Al-Qaeda on their own, in a sense. Is there a chance for that happening now, that the Sunni civilians in Iraq will push Al-Qaeda out on their own, or is the sectarian situation just too tense for that right now?
Well, in the moment that the U.S. were present, the U.S. troops were present in Iraq, and specifically in Fallujah, in Anbar, there has been really the greatest achievement that has been made in that moment of where the insurgency was basically unraveling across the country. Is that, as you mentioned, there was this strategy of basically of convincing the Sunni that it was in their interest to participate to the central state. And when I say Sunni, I'm mentioning both political leaders and tribal leaders. The Sahwa experiment was very successful because tribal leaders at some point, and also a portion of the Sunni insurgency, they found out that Al-Qaeda wasn't really working in the interest of the Iraqi people, but on the other, or the Sunni, Iraq Sunni. On the contrary, Al-Qaeda was poisoning the relationship between the communities in Iraq. It was also leading mostly a foreign agenda, which had a very bad impact in the Sunni populated areas of the country. So there was, in that moment, an opening for the Sunni locals to push back Al-Qaeda. The problem that is happening today, this scenario is it's difficult to happen again. Although the fact that the Sunni locals, they do not like Al-Qaeda because they have this experience of fighting against Al-Qaeda. They know that Al-Qaeda can't be a political partner. They know that Al-Qaeda has an ideology which is completely alien to the Iraq Sunni populated area. But I think that the level of disenfranchisement that they feel in terms of how much they feel marginalized by the central government led them to the conclusion, at least some of them, to arrive to the conclusion that it's possible to passively accept Al-Qaeda if this means resisting against the government, which of course it's a sad result, because this means that all the achievements that have been done during the time of the US surge, they are now basically deleted, and we are again like in a situation where Sunni locals, they passively accept Al-Qaeda. So it's a sad development.
Yeah, absolutely. Clearly the civilians are the ones that are caught in the middle, both the Sunni civilians who have been disenfranchised and then the Shia civilians who bear the brunt of Al-Qaeda attacks. And on that note, to what extent are multilateral agencies like the United Nations or NGOs allowed into Iraq to deal with the situation in any sense? What external support do Iraqi civilians have, if any?
You mean Iraq Sunnis or most generally?
Generally.
Okay. Well, the United Nations have pushed really for the government to undertake dialogue with the Sunni community. The problem is that the United Nations have also a limited role. It cannot really interfere in Iraq domestic politics, and it has had this role of of encouraging the government to reach out to Sunni representatives. But those Sunni representatives again are those ones who are very close to the government, not necessarily those ones who are actually on the ground and still in a mood of opposition against the government. So plus the United Nations has also supported the idea of a struggle against terrorism, which in a way fed into the strategy of the government. So this to say that the United Nations also work in Iraq in a very an environment of constraint, where it needs to remain inside. So I think it tries to have a negotiation, to push for negotiation, but not necessarily, it achieves results in that. And in regards of NGOs, well, now there is a critical situation in one city of Anbar, which is the city of Fallujah, where the U.S. troops, by the way, lost most of their troops during the U.S. presence in Iraq. And the situation is extremely critical from the humanitarian point of view. So far, only the Red Crescent has been, the Red Crescent, which is the local NGO, but the Red Cross, which is the international NGO, has been allowed inside Fallujah to deliver humanitarian help, and the city remained mostly under siege of the Iraqi army and both Al-Qaeda on its outskirts. So all the Anbar provinces also, it's suffering at this moment for cuts of water and electricity. So the situation, plus refugees flow coming out from Fallujah and going in both the north, Iraqi Kurdistan, and the south, Karbala. So the situation, of course, it's extremely critical.
Okay. What about, there were some recent reports that Iran was also selling weapons to the Iraqi government. What role has Iran played so far in this conflict?
Well, Iran has an important role because it has an important role overall the region, but is the most relevant neighbor of Iraq in terms of how in terms of also the domestic policy decision making. It operates really at this level, I think, at this point. I think that Iraq is, under the leadership of Prime Minister Nur al-Maliki, is sliding more and more close to Tehran to some extent, for two reasons. One is because it needs, Nur al-Maliki wants, and Nur al-Maliki leadership wishes to remain on power, and the Iranian partnership is quite crucial on that extent. And the other hand, because there is a regional trend where Iraq, it's part of an axis which goes from Tehran and to reach until Damascus in Syria. And so this axis is, it's there, and it's quite, I mean, it's relevant. And of course, this impacts to some extent also the Iraqi government decision-making in the relationship with the Sunni community. So this, and of course, I mean, Iran also, it has, if you see a similar narrative in saying that Nouri al-Maliki has at the moment, where they also promote this idea where, you know, there is a struggle in the region, and the struggle is against terrorism and Sunni radicalism. And this same narrative you can hear from Tehran, you can hear in Baghdad, and you can hear in Damascus. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there is very much of a trend to some extent that can be the line.
So, what else is, in the broader Iraqi context, what's happening with the Kurdish situation in Iraq right now?
Well, I mean, the Kurdish issue in Iraq, of course, it has reached the point where really Iraqi Kurdistan is a reality. It has all the characteristic. We call it a region, but it has basically all the characteristic of a state, because it has its own economy, it has its own security forces, it has its own foreign relationship. For instance, also here in the United States, in Washington, you have the Kurdish representatives, which are basically a parallel diplomacy beside the Iraqi representative. So I think Iraqi Kurdistan really has achieved a lot to that extent in building itself as a de facto state. I don't think, though, that Iraqi Kurdistan is interested in declaring independence, because the declaration of independence will create more problem than keeping in this situation where they are still geographically part of the Iraqi state, although they don't declare, because declaring independence will entail problems with the neighbors, problems with Turkey, problem with Iran. So, and this situation, I think they are, it's quite comfortable for them, because they don't ask for the international community recognition as a state, but basically they operate as such. And the next step will be to actually, now there is discussion about this pipeline that has been built between Iraqi Kurdistan and Turkey, and this is another boost towards an increasing independence, economic independence from Baghdad. I think that the next step will be, you know, to negotiate between Erbil and Baghdad the deal which will, in a way, content both. It will allow Kurdistan to have further independence from Baghdad, but at the same time will allow also Kurdistan to remain a player within Iraq, which is in their interest, I think.
Okay. Great. Well, I think that's all the time we have for now. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.